This episode of the Best Armies in Warhammer 40k is brought to you by Wicked Dicey and their event, The Slaughter. If you want to get 11th edition games of Warhammer 40k this summer, check the link in the video description or stay tuned for more information. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and Best Armies in 40k is back with a new edition. This is the video series where we go through undefeated results from Warhammer 40,000 events from the past weekend and talk about what's currently winning. And we've taken a couple weeks of hiatus because we've been at the tail end of 10th edition, moving into 11th edition. But now, 11th edition is semi-fully released. The official street release date of 11th edition's starter set was this weekend. And this, of course, is for the weekend of June 20th and 21st, 2026. So we've started to get results from 11th edition events, and as I'm recording this, I'm just returned from the Summer Ruin 2, a 32-player GT that ran the new mechanics. I live streamed that all weekend, so if you want to see a ton of games of 11th edition Warhammer 40k, please check out my live tab, or if you're a YouTube channel member, I have some recorded games available already on my channel as well. So lots and lots of content from competitive play in the new edition. Now, the metagame breakdown for this week is going to be pretty straightforward because we did only have 4 events running the new rules. This was kind of a light weekend of 40k events in general, and a lot of players were playing at the GW Open in Edmonton, which actually used the 10th edition rules. So we had 4 GTs using 11th edition. Those were won by Thousand Suns at the Summer Ruin 2, Adeptus Mechanicus at Thess Tabletop, Adeptus Custodes at Road to Nova Major Warfare, and Leagues of Votann at the SummerCon 40k Open. And we'll talk about these lists in specific just after a word from our sponsor. Have you ever wanted to be ruthlessly and brutally slaughtered? Well, I have good news for you because the date of your execution is set to August 14th through 16th, 2026 in Plainsboro Township, New Jersey. And that's because this video has been sponsored by Wicked Dicey and their event, The Slaughter. This represents the return of a long-running event that saw its rebirth last year. I was there, I live streamed it, and it was a great time. It includes a 5-round Warhammer 40,000 grand tournament, as well as events for Age of Sigmar, Star Wars Legion, and many other games. On top of that, Wicked Dicey always goes out of their way to put on a great show, creating a fun and inclusive convention atmosphere. So even if you're just participating in a tournament, there are plenty of other things to do and people to hang out with the entire weekend. And they always work extensively with local tournament organizers to ensure that all of their events for all of their games are fair and well run. So if you're looking for any gaming action this summer, I highly recommend you check out Wicked Dicey's Slaughter. You can find more information in the links on the video right here or in the video description to get your tickets today. So starting in no particular order, we're going to head on over to Washington in the United States for the 26-player SummerCon 40k Open. This was a 5-round event won by Sweet Lou, going 5-0 using Leagues of Votann, combining the Hearthguard Covenant and Mercenary Oathband detachments. This is an incredibly consistent combination of detachments. The Mercenary Oathband detachment has a lot of quality of life upgrades for Leagues of Votann army. It replaces the normal army ability that tallies the number of yield points you have and basically automatically changes you from hostile acquisition to fortified takeover when you have 7 yield points, and instead switches that to a purchase system where you can spend 3 yield points at the end of your command phase to switch between hostile acquisition and fortified takeover dynamically. That makes it a lot more consistent and a lot easier to use in situations when you might want to interact with objectives differently based on the board state. And given how important being able to empower your defensive characteristics on objectives or to give yourself that additional boost of speed with army-wide charge rerolls, which is incredibly strong in this edition, is using the new terrain, objective terrain feature mechanics that 11th edition does use, having Mercenary Oathband available to you is massive. It also gives you some nice quality of life upgrades, things like rerolls in either the shooting phase or the fight phase through stratagems, the ability to fall back, shoot, and charge, as well as as well as a couple of utility effects like the ability to re-embark into transports at the end of the fight phase or uppy downy your Hernkin units. Now, at the tail end of 10th edition, one of the strongest detachments in the faction was Hearthbands, the Call and Einhir Hearthguard themed detachment that came out as a digital release. However, nowadays, with the new 1-point detachments, Leagues of Votann have access to the Hearthguard Covenant detachment, which is essentially all the best parts of Hearthband, but only for 1 detachment point. So you can combo it with the 2 detachment point Mercenary Oathband. That gives you access to things like Materialization Matrices for a 6-inch deep strike, Fury of the Hearth for +1 strength and sustained hits on your Einhir Hearthguard that you can again combo with the hit rerolls that you can unlock through the Mercenary Oathband detachment. Now, in the list itself, we were attaching a Memnir strategist using Metaphysical Brokerage that allows you to more consistently switch your army ability between Fortified Takeover and Hostile Acquisition by giving you a baseline of 3 yield points per turn. If you ever gain fewer than 3 yield points at the end of your turn, you just gain up to 3 in order to make up the difference. So you will always, unless you spend yield points during your opponent's turn, have enough yield points to then switch your army ability back and forth on the subsequent turn. Now, that Memnir strategist was attaching into a unit of Ironkin Steeljacks. He gives them a command point cost reduction on Heroic Intervention or Overwatch, 2 of the strongest stratagems in 11th edition. Fire Overwatch is sometimes a little middling, however, Vulcanite Disintegrator Ironkin get 5+ snap fire on Overwatch rather than 6s, and if you are in Fortified Takeover, which again you can do dynamically during your turn in your command phase, you hit on 4s instead. So being able to see your opponent's entire movement phase, then be able to choose if you want to use that ability for free or which of your Vulcanite Disintegrator units you want to use it on, and then be able to deal damage passively or knock down your opponent's utility is incredibly strong. And this is not the only time that we're going to see this interaction as we talk about our list today. Now, in addition to that, we also have a trio of Einhir Hearthguard units to make use of those mercenary or the Hearthguard Covenant detached abilities. Those all have attached characters as well. We have an Einhir Hearthguard unit that alongside an Einhir Champion. He's going to give them a charge bonus, which is again incredibly important with army-wide charge rerolls from your army ability. We also have a call in another unit of 5, as well as a call with the Edisern SB9 targeting implant in another unit of 10. That targeting implant gives you reroll hits of 1, and given that the Hearthguard Covenant gives you reroll wounds of 1 already, that's pretty nice, and you can spend 3 yield points to gain sustained hits 1 on those attacks. Einhir Hearthguard already attack a ton of times. In this case, they're taking plasma guns. You can improve those plasma guns with Fury of the Hearth. They also have a grenade launcher, an extra armor grenade launcher, so they're able to fire a bunch of blast attacks in addition to those high-value plasma shots, all of them gaining sustained hits, all of them getting passive rerolls to hit, and potentially to wound. Now, that also affects them in melee as well. In this case, they were running concussion gauntlets, so limited attack volume, but high impact attacks, and being able, again, to gain sustained hits on those. Now, from there, we are also running Beery Egnerson, a Sagittor, most likely to deliver a unit of Chthonian Berserks. We have 3 units of Brokir Thunderkin, 2 units of 3, as well as a big unit of 6 with Graviton Blast Cannons, all of them taking Graviton Blast Cannons. We can use Privateer Arsenal to give these guys reroll hits, and you can kind of combine the Brokir Thunderkin units together to gain Ignore Cover. Assuming you're shooting something on an objective, you can fire 1 Brokir Thunderkin unit at it to strip cover from it, then give reroll hits to the big unit, and they can fire into that unit, ignoring cover, which is nice. Those can be delivered by a Hecaton Land Fortress as well. The Hecaton Land Fortress ignores all ballistic skill characteristic modifiers, so it generally passively ignores cover already, and with a bunch of low AP shooting that previously would be affected by cover, it no longer has to worry about any of that. So the Hecaton Land Fortress explicitly is an incredibly effective ranged platform in this edition. We're also taking taking 2 units of Hernkin Pioneers. Again, we have an up-down stratagem for those guys, so we can place them back into reserve, thanks to Mercenary Oathband. And we have another unit of Ironkin Steeljacks with Vulcanite Disintegrators for some utility. I think this combination of detachments is going to play very similarly to the Hearthband lists of 10th edition, where a lot of times what you do is use one of these less expensive, smaller Einhir units to deep strike in, play very aggressively, either 6-inch deep strike and shoot a unit to death, or deploy normally and just use the passive charge rerolls and charge bonuses you can gain to try to shoot a unit and deliver them to an objective and force your opponent to attack you back in. You can also do things like use rapid ingress to place them into hidden positions or to threaten control of objectives, which, as we've seen several times, is very effective, since in order to block out those rapid ingress moves, a lot of times you yourself have to move into a terrain feature already. So threatening rapid ingress on your opponent is incredibly impactful because it requires that they then move into your line of sight. That means that you could just forego the rapid ingress, shoot their screens, and hold for another turn. So being able to threaten these mass deep strikes with all of these teleport crests and all these Einhir units gives you tons of flexibility, and it gives you tons of board control over the middle of the table. That forces your opponent into you, so you're not necessarily being disadvantaged as much by the Leagues of Votann general lack of fast movement characteristics, and you can use your pretty solid, relatively short-range shooting to just consistently sweep them off of the middle of the table until they don't have anything left that can contend with the giant unit of 10 Einhir Hearthguard. They're going to drop in and threaten their backline and their home objective. And that moves us on to our next event, the Major Warfare Road to Nova, being held in Florida. This was another 26-player event and was won by Lee Zagrzebski playing Adeptus Custodes. Now, Lee was playing something very interesting here, because this is one of the first instances that we've seen of taking a detachment explicitly for its disposition. So in 11th edition, you can take multiple detachments based on the number of detachment points you have available. Each of those detachments gives you the option of a disposition. When you register for a tournament, you're going to lock in one of those dispositions to use for the entirety of the tournament. Now, Lee was playing Lions of the Emperor, which grants him the disruption force disposition. However, he said, disruption sounds like kind of a lot of work. You have to go take your opponent's objectives and move aggressively, and it dictates where your models have to go on the board in order to score. However, Lee also took the Might of the Moritoi detachment for 1 detachment point. This buffs his walkers, which affects literally only one model in his army, a single Telemon Heavy Dreadnought. Now, the detachment does have some sweet buffs for that Telemon Heavy Dreadnought, but you are taking an entire detachment to buff only a single model in your army. The big thing here, though, is that the Telemon does give you a pretty solid ranged gun platform. It doesn't actually synergize well with Lions of the Emperor, which is the other detachment, because Lions affects non-vehicle units. However, we can take this one detachment in order to unlock Purge the Foe as our force disposition. That allows the Adeptus Custodes army to play much more aggressively and not be dictated quite as much by their missions. Most Purge the Foe armies have some very limited objective-based scoring, and then mostly tells you to kill your opponent, which means that you can kind of just play them without having to worry about performing lots of actions or splitting your army up and moving all the way around the table. Now, that Telemon Heavy Dreadnought is still going to function as a pretty solid ranged piece. It is rocking Arachnus Storm Cannons, and you can use the Prioritize Eradication stratagem out of Might of the Moritoi to give it a rapid fire 6 on its guns. That's going to give it a total of 36 devastating storm cannon shots if it can target something within 12 inches. And it can get to within 12 inches relatively easily because it gets +2 movement, and you can also use a stratagem to move through walls as well in that detachment. So we have this backline piece that's very difficult to kill and can put out some absolutely withering firepower, especially against lighter utility units and things that might be pushing forward to engage the rest of your army. And the rest of that army is composed of smaller, more self-sufficient units that can benefit from the Lions of the Emperor detachment abilities. That includes a shield captain in Terminator armor with Idmana Mortis for the additional damage output, attached to a big unit of Alaris Custodians, so these guys can threaten rapid ingresses and then, as the game goes on, redeploy themselves around the battlefield as well. We also have a Dawn Eagle Jetbike shield captain with Fierce Conqueror in a unit of 3 Virtus Praetors. Those guys are all running salvo launchers, so we have a pretty good anti-vehicle shooting platform that can also move in and gain those bonus attacks in order to clear out infantry units and massed units. We then have one more unit of Alaris Custodians and a single Navigator. Now, the Navigator, I think, is going to be important because 12-inch Deep Strike Denial is an extremely effective ability in 11th edition. It's much more difficult nowadays to screen out wide areas of the battlefield, and especially if you're in an army like Adeptus Custodes, and especially an army like this that's really eschewing a lot of the typical utility that Custodes often bring. Being able to block out a section of the battlefield to prevent your opponent from being able to rapid ingress into that spot and either hide or stay out of line of sight so you don't get shot by the Telamon Heavy Dreadnought is going to be helpful. He's also a relatively inexpensive unit who can be hidden on your home objective. Single independent infantry characters are a little bit more effective in this edition because of the ability to hide them. You can again kind of contextual lone operative. Obviously, it doesn't protect you against indirect fire and things like deep striking next to you, but obviously the Navigator can prevent a lot of that, and a lot of long-ranged attacks aren't going to be fast enough to come get him, and anything that is just going to be countercharged by a bunch of Virtus Praetors. I imagine he's also kind of buddy-buddy with the Telamon Dreadnought, who can just rinse down anything that's moving up aggressively to actually threaten him and to take control of the backline. Now, there is also the case that, especially in Purge the Foe, with the forced disposition, you don't necessarily need to hold your home objective. Most secondaries do not require you to hold your home objective, and basically no primaries do. The downside of not screening particularly well is that it does open up your home to be taken by enemies in order to score their own primary or secondary objectives. So there is a big downside to playing an army as aggressively as this, but I mean, the army it still has those two units of Alaris Custodians that can dynamically reposition around the table, and the rest of the army is relatively fast and hits incredibly hard when it's by itself. Despite the fact that the Virtus Praetors already have their lance on the charge, so they don't get a huge bonus from the detachment ability, getting +1 to hit and wound on those salvo launcher shots is kind of a big deal. It also helps to offset the benefit of cover. If your opponent is hiding in cover, you go from a 2+ to a 3+ ballistic skill thanks to cover, but then you just get +1 to hit, so you're back down to hitting on 2s anyway. So it gives you sort of an ignore cover, plus a +1 to wound anti-tank weapon that can punch through high toughness enemies pretty quickly. If you have a lot of hordes, the Telamon Heavy Dreadnought can fire 36 shots and basically deal with them as well. So you're well-rounded in a lot of different positions. And as long as your opponent isn't absolutely swarming the board with units that you can't really re-engage and deal with, these units are going to be so effective by themselves, and the army is going to be so small that in many cases, you're able to outcompete other Purge the Foe enemies. So taking that one detachment explicitly to get that one disposition seems incredibly powerful. We've seen a lot of armies constructed this way to limit their unit count to make it more difficult to score other kill secondaries off of them and let you just farm Purge the Foe for as many points as you can. Super interesting build. This is really the biblically accurate Adeptus Custodes, where it's just a couple of small units of absolutely insane killers. And it's pretty cool that the new army construction rules allow an army like this to work. Now with that, we're going to move on over to Greece for the 31-player Thess Tabletop GT. This was won by Nikolaos Papadopoulos, who is running Adeptus Mechanicus with an Eradication Cohort detachment. Now this is the relatively new Skitarii-focused detachment. It gives all of the Skitarii in your army passive bonuses based on which Doctrina Imperative is currently active for you. Either reroll 1s to hit if you're in Protector Imperative, and Protector Imperative's gotten some massive upgrades with the new Heavy keyword. Heavy now allows you to move 3 inches and still get the benefit of +1 to hit. So, getting army-wide Heavy from Protector Imperative is much less of a joke than it was previously. Conquer Imperative also gives you a reroll 1s to wound, and we can compound that with some of the characters that the army is taking. That includes Belisarius Call to get rerolls on a selected unit, as well as Thulia Gold, who is an interesting inclusion here specifically. She does have a couple of utility-focused abilities, allowing you to advance, shoot, and charge on Skitarii units, as well as fall back, shoot, and charge selected at the start of your turn. But you can also choose a friendly Skitarii unit to give them both Protector and Conqueror Imperative, which then allows them to get full rerolls, hit and wounds of 1, in addition to getting all of the attendant abilities of both Conqueror and Protector Imperative. Now, the army is constructed a lot around utilizing these styles of abilities, and alongside the eradication cohort stratagems, you're able to compound a lot of these together. That includes things like Lance, the ability to fall back, shoot, and charge for a command point, and gain lethal or sustained hits. So we have the potential to give 2 separate units the ability to fall back and operate normally. We can give something like a Sicarian Ruststalker unit the ability to advance, shoot, and charge, which alongside Sicarian Ruststalkers is an incredibly powerful effect since they get bonuses both to advance and to charge. And of course, if we need to just deal more consistent damage, we can unlock both those Conquer and Protector imperatives. So Thulia, especially at her new points value, which has been dramatically reduced from where it was in 10th edition, is an incredible piece of technology inside this detachment specifically. Now, what units are being buffed by these abilities specifically? Now, Nicholas was playing a unit of Skitarii Rangers to unlock the battle line synergies that he needs to get the full effect of both these doctrinas. Belisarius Call can also give himself battle line keywords, so you do have some additional access to that in addition to the Skitarii. But we also have a Hishtari Fusilier units. This is one of the new units with a las cannon equivalent profile. For 115 points, you get 5 las cannons with essentially built-in ignore cover. They gain ignore cover when they target monsters or vehicles with their main weapon, and their second phosphor weapon has it automatically. These guys, being infantry, do get the ability to hide, which means you can deploy them kind of aggressively in a lot of matchups and then more easily benefit from the heavy keyword. So they have relatively consistent shooting and are a very low investment unit that you can point Thulia Gold's abilities at to go send out and potentially knock down an opposing unit. We also have, to compound that, a unit of Iron Strider Ballistari with Cognus las cannons. That's going to make them a little bit more expensive, but make them punchier into heavily armored targets. However, the second unit is going to be an Iron Strider Ballistari unit with Cognus auto cannons. This is quite a bit different. These guys previously got impacted pretty heavily by the cover rules in. There were some use cases for twin autocannons when you were fighting like mass units or medium infantry and stuff like that. That might still be the case now, but I think we're going to see a lot of, as these AP1, like twin-linked high-volume attacks as we move on future in the edition. And we also have a Servitor Battleclade in order to act as utility, in addition to 2 units of Sicarian Infiltrators for some, again, infiltration. 1 big unit of Sicarian Ruststalkers. These guys are hugely important in this detachment because Thulia can point, advance, and charge in them. As we discussed, they do get the compounding bonus of the battle line effect, where you can get +2 to both the advance and the charge roll for a total improvement of 4 movement, 4 total threat range over the course. These style of aggressive disruptor units that can push up and close the distance between expansion objectives or between your deployment zone and central objectives or your opponent's expansion is incredibly impactful in this edition. There's going to be a lot of emphasis on units like this that can get that threat range requisite to close the no man's land without having to rely on mechanics like hidden or to try to hide out of line of sight. The other thing is that these guys have a massive number of pretty reasonable attacks that you can then get lance from as well. And lastly, we have some just solid anti-tank shooting from a trio of Scorpius disintegrators. These guys are all equipped with Pharamite cannons. There is a re-roll damage roll stratagem inside the eradication cohort detachment, so sometimes you can use that on a unit like the Scorpius Disintegrator that has a bunch of like D6 damage weapons in order to smooth over the consistency of their weapons, but I don't know how often that stratagem does get used. You do have to kind of pre-declare it, which does mean it's a little bit less effective in a lot of cases than something like a normal command reroll, but the benefit is that you can use it in addition to a command reroll. And that takes us to our final event of the weekend, the one that I live streamed, the GDG Summer Ruin 2. This was a 32-player event, the largest one in 11th edition of the weekend, and I streamed all 5 rounds. Got a bunch of different games, both from the top tables as well as from secondary recorded games, and it was won by Dan Maloro playing Thousand Suns. Now, I ended up getting Dan on the stream for most of his tournament. He ended up playing his both semifinals semi-final and finals game on the live stream, and I do have a recorded game from his round 1 as well, if you want to take a look at that. So if you want to see his list in action, I have tons and tons of content about it, but it also gives me a good opportunity to discuss exactly how it works. Now, he was playing the combination of Hexwarp Thrallband and the Sekitar Cohort detachments. Hexwarp Thrallband is the digital release detachment that was initially kind of mediocre. It gives you kind of Canoptic Horde or Shadow of Chaos style of ability, where you gain bonuses to your psychic attacks based on your control of objectives around the battlefield. Previously, that was just okay. There was a little bit of weirdness with it and how it interacted with things like Temporal Surge to move during different phases. It gives your psychic attacks roll 1s to wound generally, and then roll +1 to wound instead if you were within a zone that you controlled the majority of objectives in, or in your deployment zone. And the big difference between then and now is that Sekitar Cohort then provides that psychic keyword to all the Sekitar robots in the detachment. In this case, we were playing 3 units of 4 Sekitar robots with a combination of Melta and Claws based on the different units. And the Sekitar robots, for relatively inexpensive, are absolutely phenomenal. They might be one of the strongest skirmishing units in the game, at least in this early outset. You get 4 heavy flamer profiles with an additional pip of AP, in addition to their 2-shot 3-damage missile launchers, and their secondary weapon, whether or not that's the Meltagun or the additional flamer from their claws. That makes it very difficult to move into line of sight of them, because they're going to be able to overwatch pretty effectively. They don't really care so much about rerolls. They do gain the bonuses to overwatch, whether that's reroll 1s to wound or +1 to wound, based on the board state at the time, which makes their overwatch particularly spicy, even if they're just trying to hard roll normal hits with their Meltaguns and stuff. However, the flamers are particularly scary, especially because they get overwatch for free, and obviously with the new overwatch mechanics, you get to see where your opponent's entire army is before you decide where that overwatch is going to go. And being able to do it for free allows you to choose a more effective overwatch with a unit that might spend it, or it's just free value if anything ever moves into line of sight of the Sekitar robots. So there's a couple inconsistencies with them. They are vehicle keyworded, so they don't get hidden, for example, so they do have to play a little bit farther back than other units might have to. However, being a infiltrating unit, basically requiring that your opponent stays outside 12 inches of them most of the time, as well as having very solid anti-armor shooting if you are benefiting from that flow of magic, because you can fire 8 +1 to wound 3-damage missiles in addition to your other shooting, makes them just good against basically any target. They have auto-hitting, medium strength stuff for infantry, they have +1 to wound missile launchers for vehicles, and they're relatively inexpensive and kind of difficult to kill to boot. So the army basically forward deploys all these Sekitar robots, puts them in protected positions, and then forces your opponent to come deal with them. Otherwise, they're just going to push your objectives and keep you off balance. If you do come to deal with them, the army then gets to counterattack with Scarab Cult Terminators and Rubric Marines. I believe that in every single match that I ended up live streaming, Dan had put his Scarab Cult Terminators as well as a unit of Rubric Marines plus a Sorcerer in reserve. He then can either rapid ingress the Scarab Cult Terminators and drop the Sorcerer off at the same time and basically threat overload you from the get-go. He also has a Winged Demon Prince in there as well. He gets a big buff from the flow of magic on top of the Sekitar robots, because he has all psychic attacks and is kind of middling strength as well. So being able to gain +1 to wound on his like strength 8 melee attack or his strength 4 dark blessing ranged attack is also a big deal. Now, last but certainly not least, we're also taking Magnus the Red in this detachment. The big thing that Dan was mentioning is that because of how interesting the lines of sight are in this new terrain format, Magnus is so fast with the ability to move up to 16 inches and then potentially double move himself for another 6 inches of movement for 22 inches of total movement, plus his weird line of sight that he can do with his big wings and staff and stuff. Magnus can oftentimes act as one of the few like big monster vehicle units that can start in a defensive position towards the back of your table edge or hiding in a corner, and then move out aggressively enough to touch midboard terrain and gain weird lines of sight to clear units out. Because he's psychic, he can also do that shooting into cover. He doesn't care about cover so much, and he gives you very consistent Kabbalistic rituals as well. Plus the fact that he doesn't get rerolls from Grand Coven, because we're not playing Grand Coven, so he's not able to use the 2CB stratagem to reroll everything. However, he does get +1 to wound from Flow of Magic, so he is firing a pretty reasonable volume of pretty high impact attacks, gaining that +1 to wound, good army support, and the ability to deliver that damage almost anywhere on the board he needs to. It's very difficult to hide from him with the new terrain rules, where all you have to do is touch a terrain feature to then draw a true line of sight through it, which Magnus will basically always get because he's really, really big. Now, in addition to that, we also have a couple utility units. We have a unit of Zangor Enlightened with great bows. These guys can use through the air movement now, so they're actually not quite as slow as they were previously, although a weird idiosyncrasy of Zangor Enlightened now is that because they're mounted keyword and not infantry, they don't get hidden, so it is actually in a lot of cases easier to kill them than it would be an equivalent infantry unit. However, they're relatively quick and they can run through walls, so you win some, you lose some there as well. We have a Zangor Shaman who operated independently to cast spells and act as another utility unit. We also had a Rubric Marine squad. These guys were just running Warp Flamers alongside the Sorcerer, a Sorcerer with Empiric Onslaught to jump in off a table edge out of reserve and just basically blow up a utility unit and push a flank, essentially. A lot of times what this army would end up doing, as I mentioned before, was dropping the Sorcerer's unit as well as the Scarab Occult Terminators on either the same turn or in the same round, with one using Rapid Ingress and the other one just arriving normally. And then any unit that Rapid Ingress could then move and get double moved and gain lines of sight and really basically overload your opponent's ability to kill them. So a lot of times what it would do is force you to come forward, deal with the Secretary robots, get value out of the Secretary robots by overwatching for free, pushing your important models into forward positions and into line of sight, and then counterattacking with just this massive amount of force between Magnus and the Sorcerer and the Scarab Occult and the Winged Demon Prince. Incredibly powerful army. Watching the Secretary robots activate into a lot of stuff really made you feel that their points value was incredibly efficient, and I would not be surprised if Secretary Cohort ends up being one of the strongest 1-point attachments in the game in the context of those Secretary robots being relatively inexpensive. But with that, those are all the best armies of Warhammer 40k for this week. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to Wicked Dicey for sponsoring this video, and let me know down in the comment section which of these lists is your favorite. Thanks as well to everybody who supports Tactical Tortoise, whether it's over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing, and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.